Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 2 Chronicles, the 30th chapter. And in this chapter is the continuation of Hezekiah's reign. As we saw in the previous chapter, the steps that Hezekiah took to cleanse the temple, and to turn Israel back to the Heavenly Father, particularly starting with Judah. Now, in this chapter here, it's also good to keep in mind, right, the timeline in terms of secular history, right? So at this point, with Hezekiah coming up into power, this is after the Assyrians had deported the bulk of the northern kingdom out of their land, okay? And so that the siege of Samaria and all of that, you'll notice as we read here in 2 Chronicles that you have remnants, all right, of the northern kingdom that were left in the land. Of course, not the bulk of them, but, you still had remnants that were left over there, as we will read here. So this is 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 1. And Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah, and wrote letters also to Ephraim and Manasseh, that they should come to the house of the Lord Yahweh at Jerusalem, to keep the Passover unto the Lord God of Israel. So this Israel, right, and Judah would consist of more than just the southern kingdom here. As I mentioned, the remnants of the northern kingdom were also invited to come and keep the Passover at Jerusalem. For the king had taken counsel, and his princes, and all the congregation in Jerusalem, to keep the Passover in the second month. Now, as we know, the Passover is originally set for the 14th day of the first month. But when you read here in the book of Numbers, the Lord did make an exception or whatnot, to where if you weren't able to keep the Passover on the 14th day at even of the first month, you would then be able to keep it in the second month. So the account here is in the book of Numbers, chapter 9, verse 9. And the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel. Now, when you go up above, right, it says here, on the Passover, as a matter of fact, let me start at verse 5. And they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month at even in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord Yahweh commanded Moses, so did the children of Israel. And there were certain men who were defiled by the dead body of a man, that they could not keep the Passover on that day. And they came before Aaron and Moses on that day. So, according to the law of the Passover, the ordinance, the instructions for the Passover are you have to be clean, right? But these men happen to be unclean by way of a dead body. Of course, there are different ways of being unclean, but they weren't clean. They weren't purified, so to speak. And so they came before Aaron and Moses to let him know the situation. And those men said unto him, We are defiled by the dead body of a man. Wherefore are we kept back, that we may not offer an offering to the Lord Yahweh in his appointed season among the children of Israel? So to say that, because we're defiled by this dead body, we can't partake in the Passover. And Moses said unto them, Stand still, and I will hear what the Lord Yahweh will command concerning you. So he went to ask of the Lord to say, well, Lord, this is the situation we have. How should we proceed? And the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If any man of you or of your posterity shall be unclean by reason of a dead body, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto the Lord. The 14th day of the second month at even they shall keep it, and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So the Lord said here, when they went to ask, okay, if this situation happens, right, if ever anybody finds himself in this situation, whether it's you or any of your descendants, and they're not able to keep the Passover because of being unclean um, in the time where it should be kept, then the makeup day, right, or the second chance for them is they can keep it within the second month. So if you recall, when we read in the 29th chapter here, there were a lot of priests even, right, and Levites that were unclean, right? They hadn't cleansed themselves in order to basically serve the Lord, right, and minister. And likewise, there were a lot of Israelites in that way. So as we're reading here, they had to keep this Passover here in the second month. And it's going to tell you why in verse 3. For they could not keep it at that time being the first month, because the priests had not sanctified themselves sufficiently, neither had the people gathered themselves together to Jerusalem. So there weren't enough priests that were clean. Keep in mind that Jake was going off. So, in coming back to the Lord, there had to be that process of like cleansing, of physically and mentally. And when I say physically, I mean the things that they would normally do to serve the Lord. They weren't doing those things, right? As a priest, there are certain things you wouldn't do to make sure that you're always at to the best of your ability, clean, right, or ready to be able to minister onto the Lord. By minister, I mean to serve, to do the ordinances or play the role of a priest. But being that Ahaz that did the things he did, they weren't doing that anymore. So now, to turn back to the Lord, a lot of them found themselves unclean. They weren't doing the things that they were supposed to be doing. They were neglecting their priestly duties. The temple the doors of the temple were closed, right? So now, having been turned back to the Lord and the Passover right around the corner, it wasn't enough time for enough of them to be cleansed and purified. More so for the priests, because they would be doing more, right? Actually dealing with the holy things than the people. So long story short, come the time of the Passover in the first month, there weren't enough priests that were sanctified. And the people, right, from Ephraim, Manasseh, and the remnants of Israel wouldn't have been able to make it in time to Jerusalem in order to keep it anyway. So they decided to keep it in the second month. And the thing pleased the king and all the congregation. So they established a decree to make a proclamation throughout all Israel, from Beersheba even to Dan, that they should come to keep the Passover unto the Lord Yahweh, God of Israel, at Jerusalem, for they had not done it of a long time in such sort as it was written, meaning, according to the law, how you're supposed to keep the Passover, Jake weren't doing that in a very long time. But this also goes to show you the practicality. Like, you'll see the practicality of the scriptures in this chapter, in the sense that there is the Lord has set a way to do things, but it's not always that you're going to be able to do it exactly like that. So you'll see here, this was like a best effort, but they, at least Hezekiah, understood how the Lord sees, right, now, like man seeth. So though they weren't perfect in doing it, their intentions were pure, right? And therefore, Hezekiah had faith that the Lord would have mercy and pardon the parts where they went, they faulted, or the parts where they didn't do it exactly as it says in the law. So continuing in verse 6. So the posts went with the letters from the king and his princes. Now the posts were runners. Today you post something online, it travels via the internet. It's all nice and dandy. In the ancient world, it wasn't like that. So they actually had people, very quick people, couriers, runners. Today, like you have as one example might be like the postman, mailman, but he has a car. These people were runners, so they would run, and they were very fast. So if you look up here the word post, it says here to run, runners, to run swiftly, dart, to bring or move quickly. So in order to transmit the news as fast as possible, that's why you had posts. So these men would carry the letters from the king and his princes throughout all Israel and Judah, and according to the commandment of the king, saying, Ye children of Israel, turn again unto the Lord Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, i.e. Jacob, and he will return to the remnant of you that are escaped out of the hand of the kings of Assyria. So those of you that were left, that weren't taken captive, that didn't suffer the full destruction by the hands of the kings of the Assyrians, the Lord will have mercy on you if you turn back to him. And be ye not, or be not ye like your fathers, and like your brethren, which trespassed against the Lord God of their fathers, who therefore gave them up to desolation, as ye see. Now be ye not stiff-necked, as your fathers were, but yield yourselves unto the Lord Yahweh, and enter into his sanctuary, that he hath sanctified forever, and serve the Lord your God, that the fierceness of his wrath may turn away from you. For if ye turn again unto the Lord, your brethren and your children shall find compassion before them that led or lead them captive. Lead, you get it. And in this case, that'll be the Assyrians, right? Because we understood that even the minds of the kings were influenced by the Lord. And so as King Hezekiah is saying here, look, if you turn back to the Lord, he will have mercy on your brethren, right? And your fellow Israelites who are captive, to where those that they're captive under will be more compassionate towards them, so that they shall come again into this land. For the Lord Yahweh your God is gracious and merciful, and will not turn away his face from you, if ye return unto him. So the posts passed from city to city, through the country of Ephraim and Manasseh, even unto Zebulun. But they laughed them to scorn, and mocked them. What do these guys think they're talking about? Go back to Jerusalem? Yeah, you bugging, bro. We ain't doing all that. Get that shit out of here. And you can already visualize and see. If you want an example of this, look at these Israelites today, even especially the ones that know they're Israelites, and how they laugh and joke about serious matters. And you watch those videos. That's a example if you want to know what it looked like when they laughed. Those that would bring a good message, one from the Lord, to them, and how they react. Nevertheless, diverse of Asher and Manasseh and of Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. And the diverse here is meaning like they were some, right? Not all of the remnant of Ephraim or of Israel rejected this message here, right? There were some that humbled themselves and decided to come down to Jerusalem. Also in Judah, the hand of God was to give them one heart, to do the commandment of the king and of the princes by the word of the Lord Yahweh. So they were one heart, meaning they were of one mindset. They were in agreement to follow this commandment here and keep the Passover. And there assembled at Jerusalem much people to keep the feast of unleavened bread in the 2nd month, a very great congregation. And they arose and took away the altars that were in Jerusalem, and all the altars of incense took they away, and cast them into the brook Kidron. And these altars were not the altars of the Lord, but the altars that were set up, right, to worship idols and various deities, which are really just idols. So they broke those down, cast them into the brook. Then they killed the Passover on the 14th day of the 2nd month. And the priests and the Levites were ashamed, and sanctified themselves, and brought in the burnt offerings into the house of the Lord. Of the Lord. And they were ashamed because, for one, not enough of them were sanctified to keep the Passover in the first month, and seeing all this happen and seeing that the remnant, right, the few Levites and the few priests that were sanctified doing all of this, of course, they were like, damn, they got cut, knowing that they should have been, ready, because this is their role, this is their lot. And they stood in their place after their manner, according to the law of Moses, the man of God. The priests sprinkled the blood which they received of the hand of the Levites. And that is, when you look at when you go through the ordinance or the ritual of the sacrifice, you would slay the animal, you would drain the blood, and there would be a certain cup that the priest would have the blood in. And depending on the type of sacrifice or offering it was, they would either dip their hand in the blood and then put some of the blood upon the four corners, the horns of the altar, or they would sprinkle the blood, a certain amount of times before the holy place, and then also inside, or they would then pour the blood on the side of the altar. Okay, so there's that. Where we at? Verse 17. For there were many in the congregation that were not sanctified. Therefore the Levites had the charge of the killing of the Passover for everyone that was not clean, to sanctify them unto the Lord. Which is to say that because there were so many that were unclean, the Levites that were clean and pure killed the Passover on behalf of them, right? Because technically everybody was supposed to they would killing the Passover means they would actually slay the lamb, right? Or the lamb which they would be using, and then they would prepare it. But here the Levites did it on their behalf because a lot of them were not sanctified, they were unclean. And this could have been by way of, like we read in Numbers, right, a dead body or some other way of being unclean. And keeping in mind, the scriptures tell you, based on what it is, that in most cases you would be unclean until even, right? And then you'd have to wash yourself and so on. So as you're seeing here, being that they were coming from a wayward way, right, of living, that not being the way the Lord required of us, a lot of them were not in a condition of a pure state ceremonially as well, in order to fully keep this Passover, but they made do with what they had. So the Levites killed the Passover on their behalf, right, for everyone that was not clean, to sanctify them unto the Lord. For a multitude of the people, even many of Ephraim and Manasseh, Issachar and Zebulun, had not cleansed themselves, yet did they eat the Passover otherwise than it was written. Now keep in mind that when you go back to the time of King David, the time of King Solomon, due to that split, right, during the reign of Rehoboam and then Jeroboam, there was a long history of, remember that Jeroboam caused Israel to cease going to Jerusalem to keep the holy days. So from that time, there was a good majority of them that just having generation after generation after generation even started to just neglect that altogether. Every year was just like a regular year. They wouldn't go and keep the Passover. Of course, not all of them, but a good portion of them. So imagine now being told, hey, we have to go and keep this holy day unto our God. And they're like, you know what? Yeah, let's go and do it. But the details of what you have to do, having been that for all these, generations, you haven't been doing it. It's very possible that they weren't cognizant of that, to say, hey, by the way, if we're going to keep the Passover, we got to make sure that we are clean, that we're not doing anything that'll make us unclean, and that come the day of the Passover, we're in a good state to actually do this. But, a good portion of them were not. So when they got there willing to keep the Passover, you know, it was determined that, oh, actually you're not, you're unclean. So it doesn't mean they didn't take a shower or whatever. Okay, but it meant they weren't ceremonially clean for this Passover here. That's why the Levites were basically killing the Passover on their behalf. So anyway, as we are reading in verse 18, for a multitude of the people, even many of Ephraim and Manasseh, Issachar and Zebulun, had not cleansed themselves, yet did they eat the Passover otherwise than it was written. See, according to the law, you had to be clean, right, to eat of it, but they still partook of it otherwise than what was written to do. So that's what I mean by what I said earlier about the practicality here, about them doing a best effort here. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, the good Lord Yahweh pardon everyone that prepareth his heart to seek God, the Lord Yahweh God of his fathers, though he be not cleansed according to the purification of the sanctuary. So according to the way of purification, i.e. the state you should be in order to keep this ceremony or keep this holy day, they weren't cleansed according to that, but their heart was prepared to seek the Lord. So he prayed for the Lord to pardon them and have mercy on them and still allow them to eat of the Passover. Verse 20, and the Lord hearkened to Hezekiah and healed the people. See, so once again, going to show Hezekiah understood, right, the heart that they had towards the Lord, and the mind to serve the Lord and return to the Lord. The Lord prioritized that over, the exact details of them, keeping this holy day perfectly, right? And so the Lord had mercy here. And the children of Israel that were present at Jerusalem kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with great gladness. And the Levites and the priests praised the Lord Yahweh day by day, singing with loud instruments unto the Lord. And if the scriptures say loud, you best believe it's loud. You ever pass by a church and on one of their days, even though they're going off, whether it's Easter or whatever, and they start hitting the drums and the guitar and the music, and you think it's a concert going on in there, right? But you notice that's what Jake do. Majority of these other religions, they don't really do that. Not to say that some don't do it at all, but not like the Jake churches. Let me put it like that. So anyway, continuing verse 23, it says, and the whole assembly took counsel to keep other 7 days, and they kept other 7 days with gladness. So they kept the feast going for another 7 days, i.e. after the feast of unleavened bread. They didn't like just dismiss the assembly. They just kept the feast going for another 7 days because they were so glad to be back and serving the Lord. For Hezekiah, king of Judah, gave to the congregation 1,000 bullocks and 7,000 sheep, and the princes gave to the congregation 1,000 bullocks and 10,000 sheep, and a great number of priests sanctified themselves. And they had to, right? Because this was a lot of bullocks and sheep that would be began slain, offered. So who's going to be doing that? The Levites. So therefore and the priests. So they had to, be sanctified and cleansed to be able to do that. And all the congregation of Judah and the priests and the Levites and all the congregation that came out of Israel and the strangers that came out of the land of Israel and that dwelt in Judah rejoiced. These strangers being Israelites, not heathens. All right, now we can take a look here at the word stranger. But typically you would see the term stranger as in those that were not born in the land, right? Foreign to the land, right? Of foreigners in Israel, though conceded rights. A temporary inhabitant, a newcomer lacking inherited rights, which is to say, and the word here is gar, right? Which is to say that not every Israelite was either born in Israel or lived in Israel. Some lived in various parts but still came, there. So imagine having heard, hey, you were born in Israel, and they come there to visit or whatnot. Being that they're an Israelite, they're still a part of the Commonwealth of Israel, right? So these strangers here are more so strangers, as in those that may not have been born in the land. And when you read the law on the Passover, it tells you about that, about whether he was born in the land or whether he was not. So anyway, they all rejoiced, right? It says here, and the strangers that came out of the land of Israel and that dwelt in Judah rejoiced. So there was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the time of Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, there was not the like in Jerusalem. Then the priests and the Levites arose and blessed the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer came up to his holy dwelling place, even unto heaven. And you can imagine why verse 36 says that, because there was a split after the reign of Solomon. And explicitly, Jeroboam, not only did he expel the priests from the northern kingdom, he basically gave reasons, right, i.e. those golden calves that he built for the northern kingdom not to go back to the southern kingdom, or not to go to Jerusalem to worship. So to have this Passover with a good portion of all Israel keeping it, it had been a very long time since that was done. And that brings us to the end of the book of 2 Chronicles, the 30th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.